You're here today, you saw the programme and you thought, let's come and find out a bit more about this Armed Forces Talent Programme and seeing beyond the uniform. I suppose what I would say at this session, I suppose, is really about obviously giving you a bit of a kind of introduction to the work that we're doing and this particular talent pipeline, but it's also about kind of highlighting the breadth and range of work that goes on in terms of the workforce planning component within NHS Scotland, how different parts of the system come together to look at that whole piece around about the sustainability of the workforce, and how we are maximising all the talent and all the available talent that is out there in the community for the best for our workforce, but ultimately for our patients. So this is about planning, it's about attraction, it's about recruitment, it's about all of those things. So hopefully you'll come away from the session this morning maybe with a bit more insight into that, but also maybe just understanding a bit more about this particular talent pipeline that's available to us in terms of the health and social care sector. So when we talk about that community, we're not just talking about the veterans. And when we use the word veteran, now this can sometimes be a word or a term that is challenged, or not everyone likes to use about themselves when they are themselves a service leaver. You know, we're not necessarily talking about the World War II veterans. We're talking about any service leaver who's moved on, has transitioned out of their service and is now out in the community. But there are times when service leavers do not use that phrase about themselves because it is associated with having a chest full of medals or having been out on tour, and not everyone who serves will maybe find themselves having done that, and that's maybe something it will maybe cover later on. But we talk first also about the service leavers, so those people who are in the regular, so people who are in the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, who are in that position where they have notified that they are planning on leaving and coming out into civilian life. So they may be in that transition period at the moment, which can be anything from about 12 months up to when they're leaving, or they have just transitioned out of the armed forces. So we have them along with our service leavers previously, we put into the veterans. But we also include those spouses and dependents of those individuals. So those husbands, wives and partners who have been supporting their families throughout that period of service, and also their children and other dependents. So when we're talking about attracting people to come and work in our workforce, that is including the spouses who may have had career breaks because they have been travelling around with their partner or their husband in terms of their service, and because of that, their own career or employment history has been broken because of that, or their teenage children who might be thinking about leaving school, going to university, college, finding a job. So when we talk about that community, we include all of those groups along with our reservists. So the reservists who are employees of NHS Scotland and who are also reservists at the same time, but we are also engaging with all of those people who are providing service as a reserve through the reserve forces. And the other group that we would include in this wider definition would be the cadets, so those young people who are members of the cadet forces, and also the adult volunteers who support them, many of them who are young people as well. So when you hear us talk about the armed forces community, that's the breadth of the organised, that's the breadth of the definition and all of the groups that we include within that. So I think when we talk about this and we're talking about attraction, before we move on to some of the other concepts around about this community, I think it's important for us to remember that our programme exists to attract and support the recruitment of the armed forces community to our workforce. That's set against, and some of the rationale behind this is set against the fact that we have, and I don't think this comes as any surprise to anyone who's here with us today, we have a fairly challenging workforce scenario at the moment. You know, we're constantly talking about how do we create a sustainable workforce. The words, the right people at the right time with the right skills. How do we do that for now, but how do we do that for the future? Set against a background of a decreasing working age population over the next few decades, despite the fact that we're probably going to see an increase in the working age population in the next maybe 10 or 15 years on the back of the changes to our pension, state pension, you'll see people who will be working a bit longer. That will be followed by a decline in the working age population. And you can see by the population demographics that we have smaller proportions of the population, so smaller proportions of young people under the age of 16. And our over 75s part of the population is growing at a tremendous rate and will be the largest population of our workforce in the next 10 years. I think between 2018 and 2030, there is a 30% increase in the number of over 75s. And then if you look at the projections between 2018 and 2050, we're looking at an over 70% increase in the number of people over the age of 75. So doesn't take a genius to work out what that means for us in terms of our service demands, that increase in our service demands and how we deliver and meet the needs of our patients, set against slightly shrinking working age population and increased competition from other employers out there. So how do we make sure we are maximising all of the talent pipelines that we need ultimately for our patients to get the services that they need and which they deserve? And that's one of the reasons why we are working on this particular part of the programme. So I'm going to stop talking now and I'm going to hand over to Ed, who's going to take you through some of the next few slides in terms of some of the stuff that we're doing.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much, Laura. And I think the first point I would make is it's very easy just to put a label on some of those things that we hear. So for me, I was the person who put in the tartan blankets when I hear the word veteran. Now, technically, I suppose I am a veteran or a reservist or a service leaver, depending on how you want to define it. And it's just a label that we can use for ourselves and for others. So we just need to be, I think, careful around doing that and actually going a level deeper and going, well, actually, so what does it mean about utilising people from the armed forces community? And if I just touch on some of the things that people have maybe brought out in the word cloud around, you know, some of those attributes and so on, but what do we feel as the Armed Forces Talent Programme that we can utilise from this community? Well, first off, when I go and talk to people in the Armed Forces community, I say how similar the NHS as a concept generally is to the armed forces. It's full of incredible people, a people-based organisation who are trying to get a mission achieved. There are buildings that need to be lit, heated, looked after, and that's exactly the same in the armed forces community. There are teams that need to be managed and led, and there is just day-to-day work that needs to be done to keep the organisation achieving the sort of really huge goals that it really is like looking to try and achieve, and that is transferable across both. Now, when we look at the sort of knowledge and skills, over 200 trades and professions within the military, you know, there's over 350 job roles within the NHS. It's extremely similar. And so what we can look to do is go, well, where can some people from the armed forces community remove that uniform, put on an NHS branded polo shirt on any of those pictures there, and you could be doing exactly the same thing, whether it's logistics, change the boat for a hospital or an office space, and it's exactly the same. So there really is that crossover and making sure that those skills are utilised. Now, if we look at the sort of background of training and the development, I don't know if there's another organisation specifically for the officer cohort, so sort of middle managers who spend a year training before they go into their role, whilst they're being paid, whilst getting arguably some of the best leadership training in the world. Also, throughout roles, there are a number of courses that are constantly are offered to people and are actually a prerequisite for promotion. And this is one that we need to try and make sure that we get the equivalency of, because although there are, you know, courses that are run and certificates that are achieved, it doesn't necessarily translate easily into what might be understood by the NHS as different accredited management training courses. So again, we're working hard on that to make sure there is parity with both services. The attitudes and attributes, I think, were all highlighted, and that's great to see that, you know, people do see the work ethic, the loyalty, discipline, some of the things that we're being brought out in the word cloud. but I'm not going to sit here and pretend every single person in the army lives and sort of, breathes that. It's exactly the same as any organization. There are some people who are absolutely fantastic, and there are some people who just need to be brought on to meet that standard. So I see it in the NHS. There is certainly the same. There's a lot of people who display all these characteristics, and that's another crossover between the organizations, where it's there at the heart of the values and standards that are held there. The service ethos I'll just touch on in a second, but when I look at sort of the experience of dealing with complex problems, again, if I was to just use some of my experiences as a 25-year-old boy, as I felt at the time, I was in charge of 115 people within an isolated base in Afghanistan, and that would sometimes increase up to about 200. Now, there were lots of, obviously, people there, different bits of machinery, equipment, and all those sorts of things. And it just means that I was there doing a role that was just for that point in time. And I have no hesitation in thinking anyone with a sort of similar job within the NHS would have been able to do exactly the same thing. It's just maybe the different environment. And so whilst it's there, again, it's all transferable, but it just means there's maybe a different viewpoint of and way of looking at it. Instead of it being in an office block, it's just within some tents, and the computers are maybe a little bit more rugged and a bit slower, if that could be possible. But there's all these different things that, whilst yes, they seem, and again, it's maybe this label we put on and assume what is done within the services. Actually, it's very, very similar, and it's just maybe a different scenario that gives, a bit more austerity, therefore a little bit more creativity if it's out of the day-to-day running or environment. So that's, a great one to sort of come across, but not one to be phased by, is what I would say. And then to sort of highlight my sort of point there, the empowerment, team players and collaborative especially, whilst I say I was in charge of those hundreds of people, I wasn't doing that by myself. And anyone who thinks that they are don't tend to make a great leader, and they probably won't, get that far, because actually it's all about being part of a team, having a clear message and being able to work. And even when you maybe don't have your leader there, you feel empowered to do that. So I think there's some great work going on within the NHS to be able to do that. But if we have people who are already used to working in that environment, it can just ease a transition. And I think that's a real positive of looking at this sort of particular area of society. Now, as I say, the sort of service ethos, serve again, is what we're looking at, our sort of, hashtag being. This is something that really encaptures, I think, what service leavers really crave once they have finished their time in the military. As Laura mentioned, some of the statistics there about how long we'll probably have to keep on going. Well, we want to be enjoying it and doing something where we feel we're making a difference. At least I think that's really important to the values of a lot of service leavers, which is why they can make a real benefit to any team or indeed organisation. So looking at that audience in a little bit more detail then, with the sort of regular and reserve service personnel in Scotland specifically, we're looking at approximately 1,000 service leavers each year, coming to settle in Scotland, which doesn't seem a lot if you look at it just on an annual basis. But if you think of the build up of that for extended periods of time, and then with all those skills and the transferable abilities, there's not going to be a huge amount potentially who are considering the NHS. So what I think is really incumbent upon us is to start selling ourselves a little bit more. A great organisation where the employment satisfaction is really at the heart of what we do. And speaking again from sort of personal experience, having spoken to people and myself having gone and looked at roles where you try and chase the money, you think, right, I'm out of this organization where potentially I'm spending a lot of time dictated on where I need to be at what time, wearing what. I'm going to get out of that. I'm not going to be paid. I'm sure people work it out, the sort of £4 an hour if you consider yourself on call 24 hours a day, and I'll go and chase some money and that'll be great. But lo and behold, that doesn't really tend to fulfill people. So actually, coming into an organisation like the NHS is absolutely fantastic for the service leaver and for the NHS if we can utilise those skills. You can see some of the statistics on the screen there. You know, there is a high uptake of employment before people sort of leave the forces. So again, what we're looking at doing within the programme is to elevate our profile, and Laura will touch on this a little bit more. So again, my sort of plea would be, if people have got experience of working with service leavers and they've had a good experience, or an experience where we can learn from it, as to what we could do better, that's where we really need to almost be as a community of the NHS to make sure that we're attracting, you know, part of that 83% gaining employment before their final day in service, and making sure they're attracted, you know, to the fantastic organisation that is, and utilising those skill sets. And, you know, just looking sort of at a larger geographical piece, one thing I'm really keen to do, as you can probably tell with my accent, I am not sort of a local of Scotland. I was brought up in North Yorkshire. Long backstory about serving with the Royal Regiment of Scotland, but we won't go into that today. But, you know, I love living in Scotland, and it's a beautiful country with so much to offer. And so if we're able to bring some of that talent from either, you know, foreign and Commonwealth soldiers who might look to settle within England and haven't even considered Scotland, or indeed those who've served with either, you know, Scots as a whole, or just people who would love to come and resettle here and bring that skill set, then that's something we can look to do by not only looking at what our roles are, but looking at what our sort of lifestyle is like. And that could be something, again, where people maybe think, well, I've not really got anything I can offer the armed forces talent community, but actually you really, really do, and we hugely value it. So Laura, I will pass back to you to sort of, you know, go over a little bit more around the Armed Forces Talent Programme itself, but more than happy to take any questions, or if people want to put things in the chat, and you know, we can come back to that at a later stage.
Thanks, Ed. So we know that there are people out there, and Ed and I spend quite a lot of time actually with direct engagement talking to people, and the evidence, and this is not dissimilar to other potential talent pipelines within Scotland, the overwhelming response that we get when we're out having direct engagement with people, and this also happens when we talk to young people and we talk to people who are looking for a career change, they say, yeah, I'd quite like the idea of working in the health service. In fact, I'd be interested, but I don't have the qualifications, I don't have the experience, and I don't actually know what the jobs are, I don't know what the opportunities are, and I don't know how to get into them. And they think that we're quite lucky because we've managed to navigate it. So we might not all feel lucky as part of our work within the health and social care sector, but there are lots of people out there who would love to work within our organisation, but just find us a bit difficult to navigate and to understand. And when they see job titles on the website, they think, I don't even know what that is, and I don't have what it takes. So part of what we're trying to do is to do that piece of work, helping the external community, the armed forces community, understand us a bit better and understand the pathways in. But the other bit that the team have to look at, and this programme needs to look at nationally, is how do we support NHS Scotland across the 22 boards? How do they understand? So Ed was talking there about, you know, a year of training for officers before they even start their first posting. Most recruiting managers, and I'm not suggesting all, but most recruiting managers within our organisation, within our workforce, don't really understand the qualifications and the training that come as part of the package within the armed forces. And sometimes what we find is that service leavers and veterans, when they are considering applying for our opportunities, they sometimes struggle to put it into a language. They'll talk about army qualifications and army chat, army language or navy language, which doesn't easily translate to people who are shortlisting application forms who don't recognise those qualifications or their equivalency. So there's a piece of work there around about educating potential applicants to be able to provide equivalency of the qualifications they have, and in a way that our recruiting managers will understand that. But also we've got a job to work with our recruiting managers across all of the boards within Scotland to try to provide that awareness raising, that education piece around about the training, the qualifications and the benefits of recruiting from this talent pipeline. And that's part of our delivery plan. And I would add that we're still in the early stages of delivery plan. Ed and I have only been in post for months. We're in year one of the delivery plan of a 4-year kind of plan. So we're still doing a bit of scoping and we're still kind of finding our feet with some of these key areas. But our responsibilities are to try to bring together the range of work and the partners who are already engaged in this arena. And how do we bring this together to make sure that ultimately our workforce benefits, and ultimately as a result of that, our patients benefit from this. So our job is to act as a source of information, professional guidance, data, not just for the external community, but for the internal community, for our recruiting services and our recruiting managers, and how we look to align the talents, the knowledge, the skills and the experience of the armed forces community with our workforce needs and requirements, and where we can bring the two together directly by supporting people to make that jump into mainstream vacancies, or where we actually might have to look at new pathways or new interventions to bring our workforce needs and that talent pipeline together, then we'll be doing that. So our ultimate goal is to see an increase in the number of people who are sitting within the armed forces community, entering our workforce and making the most of it. And also the other part that we're looking at is that making sure that there is a supportive environment for the reservists, because this isn't just around about attracting people, it's also about those reservists that are working within our organisation, that they are supported to be able to obviously do their job which they are doing in terms of their employment, but also to meet the responsibility of their reservist employment, for the want of a better word. So there's quite a broad range of things involved within this programme, and today was never supposed to be about giving you absolutely all of the detail for this, but just about raising the awareness for you. And this may be important to you, or it might relate to you for a number of reasons, but today was really just about giving you a little taster, and at the end of this session we'll give you our contact details. So if anyone wants to make contact with us, either on a personal level for themselves or about their service, then please feel free to do so. I talked before about increasing the awareness, and we're talking about that direct engagement. That direct engagement and being able to provide a resource and guidance and signposting to potential applicants out there in the community is based on really basic things like us making sure that we've actually got a website that gives people information, that we're able to provide them with resources about how to apply for jobs, where those jobs are, what are we looking for. But also, how do we engage with that population to find out what are their aspirations? So, for example, we do know that within the service leaver population, there are kind of areas that they're exceptionally keen to look at, which includes things like project management, HR, engineering. Those are all things that we need. So by collecting that data from within the community, it helps us to plan more effectively and bridge the gaps between what we need and what they can offer. So we're doing the education piece externally, but over the next kind of 6 months, we'll be doing a lot of work with individual boards and doing some education and awareness raising activity with recruiting managers and services to help you to understand, if you were to get an application in from the armed forces, what to consider. What are they bringing? What is this training? We're talking about what fabulous training organisations the Army, the Navy, the Air Force are, but what are the qualifications that they're being provided with, and how does that relate to what we're looking for? So that's another piece of work that we're looking at. Key bit is around about that lack of understanding about how do you, so if I'm leaving the Army but I'm actually looking for a career change and I'm thinking about, I'd quite like to get into some kind of support worker role, but I've got no idea where to start, that we're able to signpost them and to assure them that there are pathways in. So there's a promotional piece about this, and some of the learning that we will take from this particular talent pipeline may be relevant to other talent pipelines that are sitting out there at the moment that we're maybe not maximising. So all of the work that we're doing, we're not doing this by ourselves, we're not doing this in isolation, we're doing this in partnership with colleagues who are sitting in the workforce planning. We're working with colleagues within NHS education around about the Centre for Workforce Supply, the Youth Academy, all of those different partners internally and externally. We're working together to bring this all together. And that whole thing around about the networking and making sure that there is good connection. An important part of that is recognising that we have people within our workforce, and indeed some of you might be sitting at this session today who come from an armed forces background, who have made that jump into our workforce, and who might potentially be a great ambassador for us to use. If you can't see it, you can't be it. And when we're at events and we're talking to people who are saying they want to come into work in our workforce, it makes such a difference for me able to say, can I just introduce you to Ali, who used to be in the army, who's now working in NHS Orkney and who's working in HR, and actually being able to show that there is a real person who's gone through exactly the same experience that you've gone through, and here's where they are now, and they're going to share their experience with you. So if there is any of you out there who maybe are from the armed forces backgrounds, or who have colleagues who are from an armed forces background, we'd love to hear from you, because we think actually you might be a great ambassador for us. I think that one of the things that I suppose that I was hoping that, you know, in terms of learning points, because it's supposed to be a learning at work kind of week situation, that some of the things that we're talking about here, they are nice to do. They are the gold standard around about attraction and how we have a sustainable workforce. There is another layer to this as well around about some kind of statutory obligations that we have as a public sector organisation. And I'm sure most of you will be familiar with the Armed Forces Covenant, and you might see it when you are on, should you be looking for another job and you're on job training and you're looking at vacancies, you will see that potentially sitting under all vacancy adverts saying we are an Armed Forces Covenant signatory organisation. So public sector organisations, there's a statutory obligation around about our organisations to sign up to the Armed Forces Covenant and the pledges within that. And a lot of that's around about how people from the Armed Forces community access services. But another really important part about that is around about how they access employment. So all health boards are required to sign up to that, and there are specific pledges. So that engagement around about this talent pipeline and the employer related duties is a kind of mandatory obligation. So just to give you that as a background, we also have a Scottish strategy for veterans, and that whole focus on public sector organisations, and indeed there is specific provision statement within the kind of action plan around about that the NHS and the health and social care sector will look to put something in place, an employability package in place to ensure that transition from the armed forces into the health sector and the social care sector is an actual opportunity, and there are mechanisms of support there. And I talked earlier on about the workforce challenge that we face. We have to be doing our best to really promote our sector as our employers as employers of choice, and that this is actually a good place to work. And I'm sure many of you here who are here today will have significant service as I have and enjoy the job that you do greatly. And sometimes that can be a really great PR exercise, because we see so much negative activity in the press around about working in our organisation, and you know, it does good to be out there and actually talking about how good it is to work and actually being part of the family. So we have all of those things happening, but we have lots of private sector organisations out there who are falling over themselves. And when I say falling over themselves, they are literally out in force at these events trying to attract people to come into their employment. So we have got competition, and we need to get our elbows right in there and really sell ourselves. So the other thing I would like to highlight is for those of you who are in the audience today who might be managers, supervisors who are shortlisting applications and who are thinking, crumbs, I don't know anything about the qualifications that might be coming my way in an application. So if Ed and I are out there pushing vacancies and telling everyone how fabulous it is to work here, that might start to see applications coming your way from people who are from the armed forces background and who are submitting qualifications that you might not recognise. SEQF website have a great resource which is all about different qualifications. So there's a good link there in terms of looking to see if you want to upskill yourself and what those qualifications might be. And I guess the final bit is here is actually This was an introduction today. If you're interested in this topic, you want to find out more, you think there's something that we might be able to do for you, or something that we might be able to do for your service if you're recruiting, then please let us know. Please approach us, because part of our job is to support the community, the external community, but really our primary driver is to support our internal colleagues in navigating this whole world and enriching your workforce with this talent pipeline. So please speak up. We'd be happy to take inquiries through emails, and if there's something you think that we can do, we'd be happy to help. You might be thinking, what does this mean for me? If you're a recruiter or a shortlister, be mindful of applications coming from service leavers or veterans, but also from their spouses. These are potentially people who may have gaps in their employment, not through choice, but because they've been moving around. We haven't talked about the fact that people who work in the armed forces often change, move around every couple of years. So if your wife or your husband or your partner is moving every 2 years, you might be moving as well. That disrupts your employment. These are individuals who are extremely resilient, who are great planners, who are good at adapting in new environments and new people. So they may have gaps in their career, but the skills that they bring, they're priceless. So that's maybe something to bear in mind. And the other thing I would say, okay, you might not be a recruiter, you might not be shortlisting, but you might be a teammate. You might be someone who's working alongside a reservist who's trying to juggle their job and also trying to work out the reservist policy and how to get their allowance to go to annual training camp. You might be the person on the team who's inducting someone who this is their first job out of the armed forces and they're making that transition. And that can be a really significant transition to undertake. So bear that in mind. And the last thing might be, if you are from an armed forces background, we would be delighted if you would consider becoming an ambassador for our programme and engaging in some activity with us. That might be something it could be just doing a case study. It might just be having your photo taken. It might be coming to an recruitment event with us and just talking about your experience, or it might be coming along to do a Q&A session online, something like that. So we'd be delighted to hear from you if there was anyone out there who was interested. So if you've got someone in your sphere who's armed forces, who's like, I don't know even where to start within the health service, where do I go? We have a kind of mailing list where we encourage people to join up with us. We invite them to come along to sessions where we talk a bit more detail around about some of this stuff, trying to give people some guidance on what they could think about. Where we can, we sometimes give one-to-one advice if we can. If there's a need for it, we will give one-to-one advice and guidance. I mean, I know that Alison, you'd asked around about the types of roles that people can go into. It's quite difficult to narrow it down, but I think the thing that we would say is that depending upon experience, qualifications, rank and all of those different things, and we also have to balance aspirations around about what people think they should be earning and how that equates to our banding and our opportunities. But the types of roles, we know that there are, particularly from the officer ranks, we know that there's a lot of interest in HR and in project management, and there's a lot of experience around about project management. So at the moment, we know that there's a lot of interest, and there have been a lot of opportunities in Band 6, Band 7, Band 5, even project management roles, and there's been a volume of vacancies in that area. But also we're having conversations with people who are coming with engineering-based qualifications who could be going into our estates, people who've got management and supervisory experiencing, finding appropriate supervisory, and obviously, Dean, you were talking there around about some of the jobs you're doing and some of the jobs that your colleagues have gone into. So, but we also have to remember as well is that we have got people who are leaving this. So at the moment, the kind of average length of service, it isn't the 22, 23 years anymore. It's people who are leaving after maybe 8 or 9 years service. So people who are maybe in their 30s. We have people who are leaving after 24 years service, but are still relatively young and have got another 10, 15 years, 20 years of work, and who are actually looking for a career change. So we have some really, really senior people who are coming out and say, actually, I'd quite like to kind of work in healthcare support worker roles. So, but they don't think that they've got the skills, and actually they absolutely have the personal attributes and the skills to do it. And I think the bit that we're trying to do is to help people understand that it's about that transferability of your knowledge and your experience and skills. And I have to say, I've been blown away. I've spent many, many years working in the community, bringing people and helping people to consider the health service. Some of the rooms that I'm going into and the people that I'm talking to, they're employable now. They don't need any support. They are close to the labour market. They've got the communication skills, they've got the interpersonal skills, they've got the management skills, the analytical skills, all the things that we need and want in our workforce. They just don't come with a CV that says, well, I've spent 10 years working in soft FM, or I've spent 10 years as an admin manager. So they're there. So I suppose the breadth of opportunities are basically their interest in the breadth of opportunities. We've got people who want to work in logistics and stores. We've got people who are chefs who could be filling our chef vacancies, which we're finding really difficult to fill in the health service at the moment. So the range is out there. So I suppose what I would say is to any of you who've got someone in your sphere that is maybe from the forces and they're struggling to think about how they would do that, then please forward them our details and be happy to engage with them directly. That's our contact details, that's our website. So we have a web page that's part of the NHS Scotland Careers website, and that is our email address. So if you would like to contact us, then please do, and we would be more than happy to help. And I can just remind everybody that Victoria's put something on around about feedback and evaluation, in terms of if you'd like to submit some evaluation or feedback on the session, please do. And I'm just going to leave you with this image which comes from the Veterans Scotland website. There's an image that might just linger with you if that's the last thing. That's the only thing that you go away with remembering after today's session. That's just a little visual image there that might think that, you know, there's maybe somebody out there for your service sitting at the moment in the Armed Forces community who would be a real asset to your team. So thank you so much. It was lovely to see so many of you with us today, and you know, perhaps our paths will cross again soon. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks for everyone's time. And Dean, I've just dropped in a link to our Armed Forces Talent Programme Ambassador form. So if there's anyone else you know within the service who'd like to, you know, be involved at any level, even if it's just hearing from us, that'd be fantastic. Open to sort of all members of the Armed Forces community. As Laura said, you know, if you can see it, then you know you have that much more exposure. So thank you everyone for your time, and look forward to seeing you again soon. Any questions, please do drop us an email, and we'd be delighted to answer or have a call, whatever works best for you. Have a lovely afternoon.